Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will visit the United States to meet with President Donald Trump as regional turmoil approaches a boiling point amid Israel's attacks in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, and mounting tensions with Iran. Netanyahu is to hold talks with Trump at the president's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida on Monday as Washington pushes to complete the first phase of the Gaza truce. The visit comes as the U.S. continues to pursue its 20-point peace plan in the Palestinian enclave. Despite near-daily Israeli violations of the truce, Israel is also escalating attacks in the occupied West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria as Israeli officials suggest that another war with Iran is possible. What will Netanyahu discuss with Trump? And where do U.S.-Israel ties stand? Al Jazeera looks at the Prime Minister's trip to the U.S. and how it may play out. The Israeli Prime Minister will arrive in the U.S. on Sunday. However, the talks will not take place at the White House. Instead, Netanyahu will meet Trump in Florida, where the U.S. president is spending the holidays. The meeting between the two leaders is expected to take place on Monday. This will be Net's fifth visit to the U.S. in 10 months. The Israeli Prime Minister has been hosted by Trump more than any other world leader in February. He became the first foreign leader to visit the White House after Trump returned to the presidency. Get instant alerts and updates based on your interests. Be the first to know when big stories happen. He visited again in April and July. In September, he also met with Trump in Washington, D.C. after the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Netanyahu often says Trump is the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House during his first term. Trump pushed U.S. policy further in favor of Israel's right-wing government. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognized and claimed Israeli sovereignty over Syria's occupied Golan Heights, and cut off funding to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, since returning to the White House this year. Trump has shown a greater willingness to publicly disagree with Netanyahu. Still, his administration has provided unflinching support for Israel, including the decision to renew the genocidal war on Gaza in March after a brief ceasefire. Trump joined the Israeli attack on Iran in June to the dismay of some segments of his base, and he pushed to secure the current truce in Gaza. The U.S. president also opposed the Israeli attack on Doha in September, and he swiftly lifted sanctions against Syria despite some apparent Israeli reservations. The ties between the two leaders have seen some peaks and valleys. In 2020, Trump was irked when Netanyahu rushed to congratulate Joe Biden on his election victory against Trump, who has falsely insisted the election was fraudulent. I haven't spoken to him, Netanyahu, since Trump told the Axios news site in 2021. Him. The strong ties between the two leaders were rekindled after Trump won the presidency again in 2024 and unleashed a crackdown on Palestinian rights activists in the U.S. in November. Trump formally asked Israeli President Isaac Herzog to pardon Netanyahu, who is facing corruption charges at home. The two leaders, however, are not in complete alignment, and cracks in their positions are showing up over issues that include Gaza, Syria, and the U.S. partnerships with Turkey and the Gulf states. During his US visit, Netanyahu may seek to flatter Trump and project a warm relationship with the U.S. president to advance his agenda and signal to his political rivals in Israel that he still enjoys support from Washington since the outbreak of the war in Gaza. Netanyahu has asked for unchecked U.S. diplomatic and military support. Then President Biden traveled to Israel 11 days after Hamas's October 7th attacks on southern Israel, and he declared that support for the U.S. ally is vital for America's national security. His bear hug of Netanyahu on arrival at the airport in Tel Aviv would set the stage for the U.S. backing of Israel as it unleashed horror and destruction on Gaza, which has translated into more than $21 billion in military aid and multiple vetoes at the UN Security Council over the past 2 years. Netanyahu has seized on the notion that Israel is an extension of U.S. interests and security structure. In a speech to the U.S. Congress last year, the Prime Minister argued that Israel is fighting Iran indirectly in Gaza and Lebanon. "We're not only protecting ourselves, we're protecting you," he told us lawmakers. Throughout the war, there have been countless reports that Biden and Trump have been displeased or angry with Netanyahu, but U.S. weapons and political backing for Israel have continued to flow uninterrupted. And Netanyahu makes a point of always expressing gratitude to U.S. presidents even when there may be apparent tensions. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said last week that the top priority for the Trump administration is to complete the first stage of the Gaza ceasefire and move from mere cessation of hostilities to long-term governance, stabilization, and reconstruction of the Palestinian enclave. Israel has been violating the ceasefire in Gaza regularly, recently killing at least 6 Palestinians in an attack that targeted a wedding. But Trump, who claims to have brought peace to the Middle East for the first time in 3,000 years, has focused on broadly moving the truce forward, rather than on Israel's daily conduct. No one is arguing that the status quo is sustainable in the long term, nor desirable. And that's why we have a sense of urgency about bringing Phase 1 to its full completion, Rubio said last week. The top U.S. diplomat has also suggested that there could be some flexibility when it comes to disarming Hamas under the agreement, saying the baseline should be ensuring that the group does not pose a threat to Israel rather than removing the guns of every fighter. But Israel appears to be operating with a different set of priorities. Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Tuesday that the country is looking to reestablish settlements in Gaza, which are illegal under international law. He later walked back those comments, but stressed that Israel would maintain a permanent military presence in the territory, which would violate the Trump plan. Expect Gaza to be a key topic of discussion between Netanyahu and Trump. Trump has literally and figuratively embraced Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara over the past year, lifting sanctions against the country and beginning security cooperation with his government's security forces. But Israel is pursuing its own agenda in Syria. Hours after the collapse of the government of former President Bashar al-Assad a year ago, Israel began expanding its occupation of Syria beyond the Golan Heights. Although the new Syrian authorities stressed early on that they did not seek confrontation with Israel, the Israeli military launched a bombardment campaign against Syria's state and military institutions. The Israeli forces have also been conducting raids in southern Syria and abducting and disappearing residents after the Israeli military killed 13 Syrians in an air raid last month. Trump issued a veiled criticism of Israel. It is very important that Israel maintain a strong and true dialogue with Syria and that nothing takes place that will interfere with Syria's evolution into a prosperous state, he said. Syria and Israel were in talks earlier this year to establish a security agreement short of full diplomatic normalization. But the negotiations appeared to collapse after Israeli leaders insisted on holding on to the land captured after al-Assad's fall, with Netanyahu in town. Trump will likely renew the push for a Syria's real agreement. Netanyahu's visit comes amid louder alarm bells in Israel about Iran rebuilding its missile capacity after their 12-day war in June. NBC News reported last week that the Israeli Prime Minister will brief the U.S. president about more potential strikes against Iran. The pro-Israel camp in Trump's orbit seems to be already mobilizing rhetorically against Iran's missile program. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham visited Israel this month and called Iran's missiles a real threat to Israel. This trip is about elevating the risk ballistic missiles posed to Israel, Graham told the Jerusalem Post. Trump authorized strikes against Iran's nuclear sites during the June war, which he said obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. Although there is no evidence that Iran has been weaponizing its nuclear program, fears about a possible Iranian atomic bomb were the driving public justification for the U.S. involvement in the conflict. So it will be hard for Netanyahu to persuade Trump to back a war against Iran, said Sina Tussi, a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. The president is portraying himself as a peacemaker and prioritizing a possible confrontation with Venezuela. It could just as well backfire on Netanyahu, Tussi said of the push for more strikes against Iran. But he underscored that Trump is unpredictable, and he has surrounded himself with pro-Israel hawks, including Rubio. Despite growing dissent on the left and right of the U.S. political spectrum, Trump's support for Israel remains unwavering. This month, the U.S. Congress passed a military spending bill that includes $600 million in military aid to Israel. The Trump administration has continued to avoid even verbal criticism of Israel's aggressive behavior in the region, including Gaza ceasefire violations and the expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank at a White House Hanukkah celebration on December 16th. Trump bemoaned the growing skepticism of unconditional support for Israel in Congress, falsely likening it to anti-Semitism. If you go back 10, 12, 15 years ago, at the most, the strongest lobby in Washington was the Jewish lobby. It was Israel. That's no longer true, Trump said. You have to be very careful.